Of all the heroes in the Marvel Universe who you probably wouldn't want to be stuck in a room with, the Punisher has got to be number one. Maybe. Unless you haven't done anything wrong, the man has the nose of a bloodhound, and once he sniffs out just how much crime body spray you've used, well, let's just say it's a...
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
Famous on just about every media outlet, and of course the original comic book source material, almost everyone and anyone who has dipped their feet into the Marvel Universe knows about Frank Castle. An anti-hero with a tragic backstory whose one and only solution to crime is a permanent one, the Punisher is one vindictive SOB. On the video game side of things, he's made his own set of appearances, which even include an amazing beat-em-up made by Capcom, and of course more recently in Marvel Rivals as Punisher 76.
Young punks. Get off my lawn.
But of all the games that really made the Punisher feel punishing, Volition's take on the character in 2005 was, and kinda still is, the best one. Not that there's much competition, but still. A third-person action game that was also an interesting hybridization of the Punisher comics and the 2004 film, you got to play Frank in all his violent glory, gunning down criminals with reckless abandon, torturing them with ruthless efficiency, and enough violent and gruesome kills that would get Rambo's seal of approval. I distinctly remember playing this game as a young boy, Bento, and enjoying it in all of its stupid violent glory. Ah yes, those were the days where dual-wielding M4s took away the stress of growing up. But now as an older Bento who needs to play stressful games to relax, for some reason, what does the Punisher feel like to come back to after 20 years?
They don't tell me nothing! I have a family!
The game begins with Frank being interrogated by Detective Soap and Shampoo.
This is Lieutenant Richtofen.
Close enough. Frank, having apparently murdered a bunch of supposed Yakuzas in a building, is currently under investigation for multiple cases of manslaughter, murder, and homicide. But he doesn't seem to mind it so much. Both detectives try their best to interrogate him, and were taken back to his first day on the job. The narrative is essentially a recounting of past events that have led to Frank ending up in Rikers Island. And so it begins with Frank describing what it feels like to live in New York.
There's nothing to help you when the darkness falls. You're laid open so the world can rummage in your guts.
Very melodramatic and heavy on the Punisher-esque monologue, and I get a lot of vibes from the Punisher comics. It's also cool that Thomas Jane, who played the 2004 Punisher, reprises his vocal acting here.
But I guess funerals are kind of like parties for you, right, Frank?
You have no idea what funerals are like for me.
I like it a lot, and even if John Bernthal's version is the most recent voice canon that I've heard, Thomas Jane's feels very dark and dramatic that I do always think of it whenever Punisher's voices come to mind.
The scum in this city need a wake-up call.
Frank, taking a walk, decides to give his local crack house a visit just to do a bit of redecorating. After saying hi to the local druggies with his signature greeting, he meets the leader, one named Damage, and asserts dominance.
Back off, I ain't afraid of you. Wait, I give up.
After interrogating him and letting him kiss the pavement, Frank nearly gets run over by a car with a comic book license plate, and he traces it back to a chop shop that is currently run by the Nucci mafia family. Now, he's on a mission to permanently end their operations. What follows is a trail of interconnected missions around New York that starts with the Nucci family, but ends up becoming something more. Frank has to deal with various criminal syndicates and even a few supervillains who you may have seen before, including Jigsaw, a longtime villain associate of Frank. It's a typical flashback-style narrative that is essentially a recount of Frank doing what he does best and seeing his onslaught of criminals from start to finish. As far as theming for the Punisher goes, it's very on-brand, and as a Punisher fan myself, it's quite enjoyable for seeing the man wage war on New York's crime syndicate in the bloodiest way possible. As far as the actual plot points are concerned though, and the overall quality of the story, it's decent, but nothing I ever really cared for, and I still kinda don't. Much of the missions are simply there for the sake of setting up gameplay segments, and a lot of the original source material that the game borrows from has way better writing. Frank's story from start to finish just feels very one-dimensional in that there's not much evolution from both the plot and protagonist's perspective. Granted, his only feelings towards criminals is in fact very one-note, But unlike his other portrayals in comics, television, and some of the movies, which expand upon that vendetta, here in this game, it's very much lacking. That said, I do really like the game's tone and characters because it actually feels like you have stepped into the comic book world of the Punisher. Almost 90% of the jobbers are scared shitless at the sight of Frank, and it's their comedic interactions whenever he kills or tortures them that is a very Punisher mood.
Ah, shit, it's you!
Very fitting for the comic book vibe, particularly the Garth Ennis run where nobody really wants to be within a few meters of Frank. You also get other Marvel characters like Kingpin, Bullseye, and Bushwhacker for some of the higher tier villains, and there's even some cameos from other heroes like Black Widow and Nick Fury. Again, I do like Thomas Jane's take on Frank's character because it really does feel unique, and I still think his voice fits him quite well. It's just that his actual writing could have honestly been better. Overall, while the story does give the game its groundwork to operate and the characters can inject some comic book-like fun into it, I'd say it's not the biggest selling point, and really the plot is kinda there to promote the game's bigger aspect, which is meant to deliver Frank's vengeful punishing in a shooty video game format.
I'm only a soldier!
The very first level is essentially the tutorial section of the game that gives you everything you need to punish. The first thing they teach you after an accidental sound glitch
Stop screaming or I'll break your friggin' neck!
is to grab an enemy and punish them.
That'll teach you.
Hey, you're the Punisher! Thanks, man.
For what?
For saving my life?
Right.
Love ya, Frank. Afterwards, you're taught one of the game's most unique mechanics, which is the interrogation system. When you perform the 4 main types of interrogation, and you're able to keep the enemy stress bar in the indicated zone for about 3 seconds, it causes them to reveal tidbits of information about Frank's objective.
That's damage! He's in charge of this shithole!
You also get some Easter egg comic book flashbacks and a few gameplay interactions if you were to interrogate specific targets. But the most important and interesting mechanic about it is that whenever you interrogate someone, you get healed. Yes, beating and scaring the crap out of criminals for information can soothe Frank's wounds. I guess if Doomguy can rip and tear to heal, I'll give it to Frank for feeling empowered via criminal torture. Afterwards, Frank finally gets to have some guns to shoot up some druggies. A very basic feeling third-person shooter out of something from the early 2000s that also tries to make things fun with a few actions for Frank to perform. Things like using enemies as a body shield with Frank having a gun in the other hand and somehow skillfully shooting and reloading at the same time. That's seriously impressive, what the hell. Dual-wielding heavier guns like Rambo himself, unique kill spots for very visceral finishers, and special interrogations that are pretty gruesome to see if you don't spare them. There's even some small actions like kicking an enemy through a door for a slight distraction, and turning enemies into Superman. A combination of these actions and kills nets you points which you can use for various upgrades that Frank can spend, so there's a bit of incentive to perform them and even vary up your kills. Also, Frank can dolphin dive. Whee! Lastly, there is a special mechanic called, and I kid you not, Slaughter Mode, where Frank whips out both of his combat knives, becomes invulnerable with some slow healing factor, and goes on a rampage. It's a pretty brutal mode, and I cannot stress enough how brutal it actually looks. That's useful in tight spots when your health gets really low, or areas where you just need to wipe out a large group of enemies. Frank can also throw his knives with deadly accuracy. Again, very thematic and Punisher-esque with how Frank is able to do all of these actions, and enjoyable for a sort of head-empty shooting gallery. Very arcade feeling now that I'm coming back to it. There's even challenge modes for getting better scores to unlock things like artwork and such. That said though, by the later half, the gameplay felt extremely repetitive. The enemies themselves simply stand and shoot at you throughout the game, and the only real challenge they pose is that the later ones start to wear Kevlar. But a headshot from the rifles, or any gun for that matter, will take them down in 1 or 2 shots. There's enough gun variety to at least make you pick favorites with bringing them to a mission, but if that gun isn't available throughout the level, then you'll run out of ammo pretty quickly. Usually, you'll just end up using whatever weapons the level gives you. On the boss's side, almost all of them are pretty underwhelming. Most, like Bushwhacker, you simply have to shoot till their health bar runs out, and some, like Bullseye, are bulletproof because of Kevlar, meaning that you'll have to shoot them in the head to do damage. Bosses like the Russian were kinda cool and interesting at least, because the introduction you have with him was basically a cinematic apartment fight.
Oh, the Punisher flying rust!
The same one in fact from the comics and even the movie. Also, I love that the news headline describes it as a lover's quarrel. But in his second fight, you have to play merry-go-round with him and shoot explosive barrels in order to damage him. Not the best fight per se, but at least it was interesting and different enough that you simply just didn't have to stand and shoot.
Ah, you hurt me! You stupid American pig!
The last boss fight with Jigsaw was alright, but it lacked any real excitement or tension for the game's final segment. You simply shoot his jetpack, and when he's grounded, you literally go around the rooftop looking for RAM explosives and simply toss it at the guy. All in all, pretty generic third-person shooter with very little depth to its gameplay progression. But the part that I did like about it was the interrogation mechanic. Yeah, it kinda sounds like I'm into violence, but in the same vein that Doom Guy likes to rip and tear demons to death, seeing Frank go ham on a bunch of criminals is exactly the thing I came to the Punisher for. I do like that the mechanic reveals mission-related information when you perform them, and I think that it's actually kinda cool that it's woven into the gameplay. It makes the interaction with the NPCs a bit more meaningful than just simply guys you have to shoot at. Not to mention, some of the dialogue is pretty dumb and fun, but it does make for a good time. Seriously though, there are some pretty funny moments that actually make them worth it.
Hey, I'm still alive. Hurt bad though. Both my legs are broken, and my arms. Somebody throw down a ladder, or some rope, or something. Anybody got a sandwich? Or a flashlight? Starting to fade away down here. Everything's going dim.
Only weird drawback though is that you get penalized for killing enemies during the interrogation process. It's a bit weird because it kinda goes against the whole Punisher mythos with being violent against criminals, but I have a feeling it was kind of implemented in order to get away from the original adults-only ESRB rating. In any case, though my popcorn fun movie action shooting itch was scratched while coming back to this game, and the amount of gratuitous violence that Frank gets to give was really fun, the overall gameplay loop and pace gets repetitive very quickly, even if it is meant to be the game's biggest selling point.
I just got married!
If games like Fear, Call of Duty 2, and Splinter Cell were the top graphical standards for 2005, then the Punisher looks alright by comparison. In terms of graphical capabilities, it doesn't look half bad for its age, but there's not a lot of things on the character and environmental side that impresses. The actual best looking character model by far is Frank. The details on his face look good, and you can at least see some facial lines and textures to make him look realistic as can be. Every other character model though looks basic and downgraded by comparison. I get that it's because Frank is the priority, but man is it obvious where corners had to be cut. They at least mix it up with different crime factions and some of the villains look unique. But basically every other model that isn't Frank looks pretty generic and bad. Also, could they have at least made several more models in suits for the funeral scene?
It's the Punisher!
Same with the environment, there's nothing really special about it either, and a lot of the levels look extremely bland with nothing really standing out visually. Levels like Pier 74 are just darkly lit with little to no life. Even the jungle in the island level looks very sparse with basic foliage. There's some shadow casting on the character models, but it's never consistent and only appears in certain areas. But if I had to like at least one thing on the game visually, it's the body damage on the enemy characters whenever they get shot. It's simple now just because it's limbs and heads popping off, along with bullet damage whenever certain guns or kills are used, but I distinctly remember it making the game look very detailed and gory. And again, even more so with certain interrogations.
Press Ma to keep the knife sharp.
On the sound front, the game has some solid effects with the guns, since that's what you'll be hearing a lot from level to level. A bit dated because of the quality, but still distinct with each of the different guns that both Frank and the enemies get to use. The music was alright too. There's a good mix of songs that will play to set the mood for action scenes, But there's also ones that are thematic, like how the Nucci estate uses an accordion to sound very old country and almost something reminiscent of The Godfather. Other tracks do follow a similar suit, depending on the level. The voice acting is at least the biggest standout for me. Nothing that'll take top awards, but something that's just a very appropriate fit for a comic book game like The Punisher. A lot of Frank internally monologuing.
I don't smile much. Don't smile ever. But if I did, this would be one.
Having one-sided arguments with certain characters.
You're supposed to be dead.
I've heard that before. But guessed.
And the bad guys just having a comically bad time trying to go up against the Punisher.
I know nothing of value.
It's a fun romp that you can't help but laugh and enjoy for its over-the-top silliness. There's also notable voices from Steve Blum, Robert Atkin Downes, and Nolan North, who do a few of the villains. And of course Thomas Jane, who gives a very frank, get it, performance.
Just because the mayor chased away the monsters, chased them to Brooklyn and the Bronx, don't think this place has changed.
A decent presentation that, while not the strongest visually, brings the over-the-top wackiness of a comic book Punisher to a video game format thanks to its cast.
You think this is a game? Game?
As a Punisher fan, especially having gotten the chance to look over his media again thanks to his comics, TV appearance, and even some cameos, I was thrilled to at least revisit this childhood memory of mine in all of its mindless, violent glory. That said, man is this game hard to like after 20 years. It really is a product of its time with the older design elements in making the Punisher just a simple third-person shooter with little to no depth. Granted, it is one of Volition's early works before they would move on to some of their more notable projects like the Saints Row series, so I at least commend them for giving the Punisher a shot. Too bad we'll never see them again though. Now, is it worth playing, or is it worth giving a try? Probably not, and I only recommend this if you're an absolute fan of the Punisher and have the capabilities of finding an older PS2 copy, ROM, or even the PC version, which I think exists, ? And that you're okay with arcadey, mindless shooting, and criminal beatings for several hours. While there are a lot of other games in the past and present that will outshine the Punisher in every aspect that it's made, it is the only game that actually feels like a proper Punisher one, and I think it's only one of the two that I know are good. I heard No Mercy was terrible, and I never even knew that was a game until writing this video. But who knows if we'll ever get another Punisher game in the same vein, or something completely different. For now, we'll just have to enjoy Frank in all of his current media lineup. But that's gonna do it for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. There will be more games to play and more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned if you'd like to see more. But for now, I'll see you all next time.